be perfect. You are perfect. Now think about that for a minute. You can't be perfect, you just are perfect. Something is beyond our reach, yet if we just sit still for a minute, we're already there. For example, I don't really see myself as an inspirational person. Heck, I can barely remember to change the laundry and not get in trouble for it. Thank you, chemotherapy. However, I know my story serves as a powerful inspiration for many, so please bear with me tonight while I share some of my humble tale. Let me set the table, so to speak. When I turned 34, my life had changed completely. I left my hometown of Austin, Texas, and moved to Chicago, Illinois, where I had a job with IBM. Talk about out of the frying pan and into the freezer. But I was happy, I enjoyed it, it was great. Having been a sailor since I was 6 years old, I found Lake Michigan to be sort of kind of heaven. I began sailing the Chicago waterfront, where I met a beautiful woman named Donna Ray Woodside. And we were married 10 months later. In our first year of marriage was bliss. We had both finally found the missing parts of our lives. But a year and 4 days after our wedding, on the eve of the 2004 sailing season, I asked Donna Ray what I thought at the time was an innocent question. Darling, what is this lump in my chin? It's a bump right here and I'm having trouble shaving around it. Do you think that's an ingrown hair? Being a dentist, she said, nope, that's an enlarged lymph node. So we called my internist, who then put me on an antibiotic. Instead of shrinking, though, it was growing. 3 antibiotics and 6 long weeks later, the now walnut-sized lymph node had to be biopsied surgically. Waiting for the pathology lab result was one of the worst days of my life. The phone call we all dreaded was not to tell us if I had lymphoma, but to tell me if I had Hodgkin's disease or non-Hodgkin's disease. See, the difference was, one is considered one of the most curable forms of cancer, the other is one of the most difficult to treat. As the day progressed and the tension grew, every time the phone rang, we jumped. And let me tell you, we managed to get like 5 calls that day that were the ones you hang up on. But I'll never forget our dog Austin in the middle of the afternoon walked into the middle of our backyard and vomited, which sort of summed up how we all felt. Finally, the call came. Mr. Wilhite, I'm sorry to say, you have follicular grade 3A non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and you need to find an oncologist immediately. Boom, life stopped. 36 years old, healthy, strong, newly married, starting a family, and nothing but the sunshine of life ahead of me, and a phone call stopped it all in an instant. People often ask me, how do you do it? How do you face such a challenge? I used to fumble with my answer, trying to think of something to say which didn't make me sound like a complete jerk. I didn't feel courageous. I didn't feel brave. I was scared, like I've never been terrified in my life. The truth is, survival is not a choice. The very question, how do you face it, implies that there's a choice, that it points to some fork in the road. Reality tells you a very different story. There is no choice. It was do the chemotherapy, suffer the side effects and the damage to my body, or die. A torturous, painful, awful process stretching a mere months, not years. My disease in 6 weeks had already spread to 14 tumors throughout my body and was accelerating. There was no time. Because of my age and my good health, my oncologist favored giving me the maximum dosage of chop-reduction chemotherapy in order to, in his words, destroy this disease completely and hopefully it'll stay away for at least 10 years. See, my disease is incurable. It will come back. So our strategy is live life 10 years at a time. Through the love of my wife, my family, and an incredible circle of friends. The chop-reduction chemotherapy, which took 6 months, destroyed my cancer and I got into remission. I had achieved remission by the end of 2004. My body was ravaged, hairless, frail, pale, feeble, but the news was I had survived. There is no strategy for survival. There is no grand plan to get through it. No formula I can tell you that's going to provide you a path to getting to remission. Our strategy was simply summed up by my oncologist as, I'm buying you 10 years at a time, starting today. Coming out of treatment, I felt strongly that there had to be a better way. Something needed to be done, and Honore and I were going to do it. So we began raising money for the Leukemia Cup Regatta in Illinois because we were both sailors. Our first year, we raised $35,000, which was nearly half the total that Chicago raised in the event that year, which was $75,000. We helped organize and run the event in the following years, but more importantly, we started to recruit and reach out to other fundraisers and organizers to join our mission. And let me tell you, they do an amazing job. We began making a difference. The Leukemia Cup Regatta Chicago exploded into one of the best events of the summer. And while all of this was going on, Honore and I were attempting to have a family. We set aside our fears of cancer's return and chose to get on with our lives. I know that sounds easy, but the emotional pressure of living with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is immense. Every blood test, every CT scan, every common cold is suddenly cause for alarm. Our hearts would shudder. Was it back? Could this be? What if it's here? But we shouldered the burden and we persevered.
You did.
In late January of 2008, we were rewarded with the birth of our little girl, Hope. She was a gift from the angels. We were beyond grateful. We had conquered this terrible disease, chosen to get on with our lives, and found a greater happiness despite our challenges. 4 months later, what if happened? My quarterly checkup with Dr. Greenblatt revealed 2 small lymph nodes were mildly swollen. These would have been overlooked by the radiologist, except they were in between my aorta and my kidney, which is a place where lymph nodes don't normally swell. So he had circled them for Dr. Greenblatt to examine. We then had to have a biopsy of them as quickly as possible. After an agonizingly painful procedure in which they drove a needle into the space in between my aorta and my kidney using a CT scanner, we found ourselves again waiting for results. The bane of every cancer patient is the waiting. It feels so much better to be doing something, and I mean anything. I did not get the 10 years in remission we were counting on. The emotional blow was beyond description. I was devastated. My worst fear, having a family and then having to put it through the hell of a cancer treatment, had come too soon. And let's not even get into what happens if I didn't make it. We weren't ready. Nobody is ever ready. The treatment was 3 months of preparatory chemotherapy, followed by a stem cell transplant. There's really no good way to describe a stem cell transplant. It's awful, painful, scary, terrifying, soul-searching, gut-wrenching, you name it. For my cancer, it was the Alamo. It is our last stand. It was our one chance to buy 10 more years. And Hope got to come and see me one time when I was in the isolation unit for 30 days. There had to be a better way. During my 3 months of chemotherapy in preparation for my stem cell transplant, we fundraised like never before in support of that year's regatta. Honore and I raised $68,000 and helped Chicago break the $200,000 barrier. And in a strange coincidence of timing, the Leukemia Cup Regatta in Chicago, that event, was held the weekend before I was supposed to check into the isolation unit at Northwestern University Hospital for my transplant. After 3 months of chemotherapy, Tracy Howard convinced me to stand up at a podium with no hair, no eyebrows, and barely able even to walk and speak to that crowd. I was honest. I told them I was scared. Cancer wasn't fair. And how I understood that the treatment was awful, but it was something I had to do because I wanted to live. There was not a dry eye in that place that night. And it didn't help that I looked like Uncle Fester. I struggled just to stay upright, but we made it. And 8 years later, thanks to my treatment and the advances in our understanding of blood cancer, fueled by the passion of people like you, my doctor says I'm as healthy as ever. They now believe my cancer will not return, and if I do come down with cancer, it will be a whole new diagnosis. My 10 years of freedom became a lifetime. I don't take the inspiration of my story for granted. I don't take the inspiration of my story for granted, because I've seen and heard so many other stories that didn't have this kind of an outcome. Our friend JC, back home in Chicago, had just started her stem cell transplant for refractive recurrent ALL. Or Carrie, a skipper I raced for just a few years ago who happened to come down with my exact same diagnosis. He needed a stem cell transplant, but he did not survive long enough to get it. And Robin Reynolds, who we met with last year, who I remember vividly speaking with about her cancer. And she said, Travis, if you can do it, I can do it. But they didn't. It's because cancer doesn't fight fair. And so neither will I fight fair. I will do everything I can to make sure this devastating disease is cured once and for all. Whether it's fundraising by sharing my story or helping others to get through their stories, I'm dedicated to making sure that the lymphoma and other blood cancers don't do to others what is done to me and my family. I look at life and wonder, what really makes a difference? What is it that I can do? How can I help inspire others to fund the life-saving research that LLS does? Passion is the word that keeps coming back to me. During treatment, I was passionate about living. I knew I could take anything those doctors or the chemotherapy could throw at me, and I would survive. After treatment, I knew we needed to keep fundraising, keep learning, and keep networking to get more survivors to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and their services. There really is no answer to that question, how do you do it? Everyone must find their own path, and those of us who've walked this path can serve as an inspiration through our love, our support, and our sharing of the stories. So what I want to challenge all of you with today is to find that passion in yourself, to keep doing the hard work, keep inspiring, and keep asking for support, and keep living life to the fullest. As I was once told, live today, for yesterday is gone, tomorrow promised no one. Thank you.